Jayam Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivrajagacharya Astotara Satta Sri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Prem Sakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adigaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Nath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai.
Hey.
Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai.
Hey.
Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Premanandi.
Hari Bol.
Hari Hari Bol.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Krishna.
Hari
All
Krishna.
glories to the assembled devotees.
Hari Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hari Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So we start a new chapter today. Mother Sobarate, I sent you an email just a few minutes ago. Did you get it?
No, I did not, but I'll check it now. And do you want me to get that up first?
Yeah, so it's summaries to both the last chapter and this chapter since they're related. I figured since Srila Prabhupada, starting from the 5th canto, Srila Prabhupada actually started writing a summary before each chapter to give an overview of what's going to happen. And I find that that's a nice thing to do, either at the end of the chapter or at the beginning, just to get an idea of what's going on. So I've actually written chapter summaries for most of the chapters of Bhagavatam. So I'll just, since Srila Prabhupada didn't write any for this section, we'll just, many devotees wrote different summaries. I think there's one called Srimad Bhagavatam at a Glance. That's a nice book. And then there's also Purna Pragya Prabhu also wrote a summary of Srimad Bhagavatam, and there are probably others as well. So this is just from this one would be from me.
Very
So
good. This is very good. Usually they always summarize just like that and then they start this next chapter. But this is very good.
Oh.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
I can. Yeah, so what we'll do is, since these two chapters are related, because what happened was the story started being told at the beginning of this last chapter, 16. But then there was a question because the sages of Naimisharanya, they were wondering, hey, if this topic relates to Krishna, can you give us a little more background on this story? Because they wanted to know, the full details of it, if it had to do with Krishna. And then so the rest of the chapter, instead of getting to the point of, how the chapter started, it just explained, the events leading up to this particular moment. And then the chapter that we're going to start today will then get back on track with, it's basically there's a flashback that happens. So what we'll do is we'll read the chapter summary for the last chapter, just to refresh our memories of what happened there. And then we'll get an idea of what this next chapter is going to be about. Now, in Srila Prabhupada's purports, we've already touched basically on what's coming up. So it's not really like a spoiler or anything if you're not familiar with these chapters already. But it's just, sort of a preparation to understand what's going on. So, but before I read these, we'll chant Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, so first the summary to chapter 16, how Maharaj Parikshit received the age of Kali. Sutta Goswami then began describing how Maharaj Parikshit, who was as righteous as his grandfather in protecting and ruling his citizens, once came upon the master of Kali Yuga in the guise of a king, beating the legs of a cow and a bull. Desiring to hear more details of this story with relation to Sri Krishna and his devotees, Shonaka Rishi requested that Sutta Goswami discuss the circumstances under which Maharaj Parikshit came upon this incident and how he retaliated in order to uphold Dharma. As described before, upon the departure of the Lord from his earthly pastimes, the dark and ominous symptoms of Kali Yuga began to permeate the world, and as such, people in general became quarrelsome and greedy. Because of this, Emperor Parikshit, who could not tolerate such degradation, began to travel the world in order to counteract this cancerous plague and reestablish the principles of religion. As Maharaj Parikshit conquered all parts of the earth, providing suitable protection and guidance to each kingdom he visited, he constantly heard stories of his righteous forefathers and of the great Sri Krishna, who, out of love, served the Pandavas as if he were their subordinate, and saved Maharaj Parikshit from a blazing arrow while he was in his mother's womb. While the emperor was thus traveling, Dharmaraj, in the form of a bull, was wandering the earthly realm and came upon the personification of Mother Earth in the form of a cow who was crying. Upon inquiring from the cow the cause of her grief, Dharmaraj began to present possible scenarios that could be the impetus for her sorrow, including physical, emotional, and empathetic maladies, such as the exploitation of innocent people by unscrupulous leaders, or the disappearance of Sri Krishna from her surface. Having thus been questioned by Dharmaraj in the form of a bull, Mother Earth began to list the qualities of the Supreme Lord, and she explained that now that he has departed, all of these qualities have gone with him. Mother Earth continued to lament that prior to Krishna's appearance in this world, she was overburdened by the corruption of atheistic kings. And now that he is gone, although that burden is returning, it is insignificant compared to the torment of separation she is feeling from that Supreme Personality, whose character and activities are inspiring and filled with pure love. While Dharmaraj and Mother Earth were thus conversing, Maharaj Parikshit arrived at the bank of the Sarasvati River, in the vicinity of where this dialogue was taking place. So that's the summary of 16, and now we'll do a summary of the chapter that we're going to start today. When Maharaj Parikshit came upon the cow and the bull, whose protectors were nowhere to be seen, they were being repeatedly struck with a club by a Shudra in the guise of a king. The bull, who was standing on his last leg, was trembling in fear, and the cow, devoid of her calf and malnourished, was crying due to being severely beaten on her legs by this Shudra. The virtuous emperor, seeing this grave injustice, swiftly approached the offender and prepared to kill him for his atrocious behavior. In order to fully assess the situation and determine the proper punishment, Maharaj Parikshit, in a deep, resounding voice, began to chastise the shameless Shudra, who was torturing the innocent animals, questioning both him and his victims. Noticing the peculiar characteristics of the bull, who was pure white in color and was balancing on one leg, the righteous emperor directed most of his queries toward him, suspecting him to be some sort of demigod in disguise. Maharaj Parikshit then assured the bovine pair that there was no longer reason to lament, for as long as he was the emperor of the land, such criminal behavior from villainous men who neglect scriptural injunctions would never go unpunished. After being asked by the emperor how he came to have only one leg, Dharmaraj, in the form of a bull, began to explain that many different philosophers have presented several theories in that regard, claiming that either the self, action, superhuman powers, or material nature are culpable for one's distress. The bull, honorably refraining from putting blame on anyone, advised the qualified emperor to judge for himself who was to be held accountable for the nefarious acts that were taking place. Having heard the enlightened and righteous words of the bull, Maharaj Parikshit understood him to be none other than the personification of religious principles, and began to explain the symbolism behind the unusual occurrence that had happened, or that he had happened upon. The emperor understood that originally the bull had 4 legs, which represented the 4 pillars of religion, namely austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. As each yuga came to an end, one of these pillars had been completely destroyed. And thus, on the dawn of Kali Yuga, only the leg of truthfulness remained. The Shudra, in the guise of a king who was attempting to destroy the last leg, represents unqualified people who accept government posts in order to exploit the citizens for personal gain. Thus, fully understanding the complete situation, Maharaj Parikshit took up his sword and prepared to kill the personality of Kali, who was dressed like a king. Upon realizing that the emperor was ready to kill him, Kali relinquished his weapon and royal disguise and pleaded for mercy. Although Maharaj Parikshit promised not to kill this unarmed and surrendered man, he told Kali, the friend of irreligion, that he could not remain in his empire, having nowhere else to go, because Maharaj Parikshit was the emperor of the world. So if you can't remain in the empire, that means you can't exist. So having nowhere else to go, Kali requested the magnanimous emperor to specify a place where he could permanently reside under Maharaj Parikshit's protection, to which the emperor granted him permission to reside in places where gambling, drinking means intoxication, prostitution, and animal slaughter were performed. Upon further solicitation, Kali was also allowed residence anywhere that gold was hoarded, because in such places, falsity, intoxication, lust, envy, and enmity are surely present. Thereafter, through his expert leadership and protection, Maharaj Parikshit reestablished the lost legs of religion and significantly improved the condition of the earth. The rule of Emperor Parikshit was so glorious that all of the citizens felt completely safe and provided for without fear of exploitation or famine. Okay, so now we will start chapter 17. And today's verse is number 1. Thank you, Mataji. Sutta uvacha tatrago mitunam raja hanya manam anattavat dandahastam cha vishalam dadrishe nripalanchanam. Sutta uvacha tatrago mitunam raja hanyamanam anattavat danda hastam chavrishalam dadrishe nripalanchanam. Sutta uvacha tatrago mitunam raja hanyamanam anattavat danda hastam chavrishalam dadrishe nripalanchanam. Please chant.
Hare Krishna. Sutta uvacha tatra go mithunam raja hanyamanam anathavat dandahastam cha vrashalam dadreshe nrapalanchanam.
Sutta uvacha Tatra go mithunam raja hanyamanam anatavat dandahastam cha vrishalam tadrishen rupalanchalam lanchanam.
Suta uvacha tatra gomitunan raja hanyamanam anathaval dandahastam cha vrishalam dadrishen ripalanchanam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Shruta uvacha tatra gomitunam raja hanyamanam anathavat dandahastam cha vrishalam dadrishin pakalanchanam.
Anyone else? Okay. Sutta Uvacha. Sri Sutta Goswami said, Tatra, thereupon, Go Mithunam, a cow and a bull, Raja, the king, Hanyamanam, being beaten, Anatavat, appearing to be bereft of their owner, Danda Hastam, with a club in hand, Cha, also, Vrishalam, lower caste Shudra, Dadrishe, observed, Nripa, a king, Lanchanam, dressed like. Translation. Pardon me. Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Shudra, dressed like a king, was beating a cow and a bull with a club as if they had no owner. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The principal sign of the age of Kali is that lower caste Shudras, in other words, men without Brahminical culture and spiritual education, spiritual initiation, will be dressed like administrators or kings, and the principal business of such non-kshatriya rulers will be to kill the innocent animals, especially the cows and the bulls, who shall be unprotected by their masters, the bona fide Vaishyas, the mercantile community. In the Bhagavad Gita, 1844, it is said that the Vaishyas are meant to deal in agriculture, cow protection, and trade. In the age of Kali, the degraded Vaishyas, the mercantile men, are engaged in supplying cows to slaughterhouses. The Kshatriyas are meant to protect the citizens of the state, whereas the Vaishyas are meant to protect the cows and bulls and utilize them to produce grains and milk. The cow is meant to deliver milk and the bull is meant to produce grains. But in the age of Kali, the Shudra class of men are in the posts of administrators, and the cows and bulls, or the mothers and fathers, unprotected by the Vaishyas, are subjected to the slaughterhouses organized by the Shudra administrators. The verse again, Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Shudra, dressed like a king, was beating a cow and a bull with a club as if they had no owner. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashchati Deshatharne Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpa Trubhyas Chakrapa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for joining. So today, we could talk about a lot of things today. I think the tendency for most speakers on a verse like this would be to talk about cow protection the whole time, right? And it's a very important thing. It's something that Krishna has a great passion for, right? Cow protection. I think most of us here understand at least that the cows are meant to be protected to some extent. I think we can all deepen that understanding by understanding truly what it is to protect cows, because we see in society these days the cows aren't treated very well, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out in the purport. And so, although we do still appreciate what the cows are giving us, many of us aren't really reciprocating so much with that, taking care of cows. Some are, and that's great. And at the very least, some who can't protect the cows personally are at least contributing to those who are protecting the cows. So that's an important thing. And we could spend today's class just talking about that and encouraging the devotees to, as far as they can comfortably do, try to at least support those who support cows, right? So that's something we could talk about, and that would be a very important thing to discuss. But today, I'm going to talk about something that it's indirectly related to that, but it's more applicable to each of us, right? And that is the danger of Shudras taking the positions of the higher Varnas, because that's what today's verse is about. It's about both of these things, right? But the problem is that the Shudras are taking the positions of the higher Varnas, and that's why these cows aren't being protected. So instead of, like I said, doing the class based on or talking about cow protection, which would be a really good way to spend this time, what I want to do is, instead of talking about the symptom, I want to treat the disease. So I want to get down to why these things are happening. And if we understand why these things are happening, then naturally we can much more easily engage in proper cow protection, right? So we can actually know what it is. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the danger of Shudras, meaning Shudras by quality, taking the position of the higher Varnas. So just to start out, it's important to understand, because these days, the idea of Varnashrama Dharma, if you ask 100 devotees what they think about Varnashrama Dharma, you're going to get 100 different answers, and some of them will be similar, but some of them will be drastically different. Some devotees will insist that it is absolutely necessity, an absolute necessity that we reestablish Varnashrama Dharma, right? And others will say, no, there's no need, because we are Vaishnavas, we're above the system of Varna and Ashram. And so there's no need to focus on such things. Others will have this idea that Varnashrama just means cow protection, right? Which is certainly a part of Varnashrama. Some devotees will say that, well, Varnashrama is something that we've tried to establish and it didn't quite work out so well, so we're just being practical. Yukta Vairagya, whatever we have, we're going to engage it in Krishna service, and we tried, Haribol, what to do, right? So there's so many different ideas on what Varnashrama is and whether it's necessary or not. Like I said, just to define it, we'll get so many different definitions of what it is. So first, we're going to just talk about what is Varnashrama, right? Because it's important to understand at least what it is, even if you're intent on not following it. You should at least know what it is, because it's brought up so often, right? So Varnashrama Dharma is a system that was given to us by, you may have heard of him, his name is Krishna, He's blue. He plays the flute. Got a peacock feather on his head. And so he noticed that society needs some direction, right? And so he thought, well, I'm going to give them a system with that. If they follow it, this system, not only will they be engaging their natures according to their conditioning, but they'll also be purifying those conditionings and gradually becoming more conscious of me, Krishna, right? So they're becoming Krishna conscious just by following this system of dealing with society. So it's a system that Krishna gave us to teach us how to deal socially with others while simultaneously elevating our consciousness to Krishna consciousness, right? So it's Krishna telling us how to deal with others in a natural way that automatically brings us to Krishna consciousness gradually, right? So this is Krishna's social system, social order, right? And the reason it's important to understand what it is because when we get in these different arguments over whether it's necessary or not, we tend to argue not based on Shastra. Like, we'll bring up Shastra, of course, to support whatever point we're trying to establish. But it's more based on what our experience is, right? Generally, when we see these arguments happening, it's about the experience, right? And we know that on the pramans, there's Shabda, what you hear, the descending knowledge that comes from Shastra. Then there's Anuman, there's logic, there's Pratyaksha, there's direct experience, etc. Then there's examples, analogies, there's tradition, there's things like that. But generally, we talk about these three: the descending knowledge, the logic, and the experience. What's it called? Yeah. There's another word there. I keep forgetting words, but anyway, so experience, what we know from our, I guess I can't think of the other word, but what we know from our dealings, from our experience. Right. And so we know that Shabda is the highest. So, at least we understand the value of Shastra. But as I said, we generally take what our experience is in this material world and give that a whole lot of, weight and say, okay, look, we've tried to do this, it didn't work, therefore we don't want to do it anymore. Instead of saying, well, we tried to do this, but clearly it has to work because Krishna gave it to us, so maybe we were doing it wrong, for example, right? So that's something that we can look at. But I don't want to make this all about whether or not we should follow Varnashrama, because that it would be, a waste of air. What I want to do is show that the system of Varnashrama comes from Krishna, what his intention was in establishing that, and how we can benefit from it. Whether you want to follow it or not, that's up to you, because that's Krishna's stance anyway. Krishna gives us something. He allows us to take advantage of it properly or not. And he's completely detached from it. And that's what the Brahmanas do too. So in Bhagavad Gita 4:13, Sri Krishna, again, the blue one with the blue and the feather, he says to Arjuna, according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. In his purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, among other things, he writes, the tendency of a particular man toward work is determined by the modes of material nature which he has acquired. So again, the modes of nature known as the gunas, the three gunas. So it means quality. It doesn't mean birth necessarily. A few days ago, we talked about this, about how a family that you're born into can be an indication of what your inclination will be, because we don't get these bodies by accident. We get these bodies because of, in our previous life, we had certain qualifications and desires. And so therefore, taking birth in a Brahminical family it is an indication that at some point there was at least some interest or qualification in Brahminical activities. But it doesn't mean that we will continue to follow that path, because we all have free will, right? And it also doesn't mean that if we're born in a Shudra family or lower than Shudra, that we will necessarily take on those qualities. It can be an indicator that from, you know, our past lives, there wasn't much interested in that, so there was a lot of mode of ignorance. But if we come to Krishna consciousness and we become sincere in that, our qualities change, right? So Varna, and Srila Prabhupada made this clear, Krishna made this clear, Lord Chaitanya made this clear, that Varna is determined not by birth, but by quality, right? And so there are also many verses in the various Puranas that talk about this, right? And the way we determine them, as Krishna pointed out in verse 413, is by the modes of nature, how they're affecting us, right? So it's pointed out that the Brahmanas, they're in the mode of goodness. That means they have a lot of faith in the Supreme Lord. So they study the Shastras because they know that this is Krishna's word. They go by the Shabda Praman, the proof that's coming from the descending process. And they approach it in a very humble, submissive way. They read it, they understand it, and they represent it to others in a very detached way, right? So this is what they do. They don't accept any sort of salary because they don't consider themselves the doers. They know that Krishna is in charge of everything. They're in the mode of goodness. So they understand that Krishna is the provider of everything. So if Krishna wants them to eat, then food will come. But their occupation is to study and to present the Shastras, right, to others. Then the Kshatriyas, they have a mode of passion, right? So they want to do something. Their natural inclination is to protect others, right? So they want to expand a community as far as they can and give proper protection to everyone, not just the humans, but the animals. They want to make sure that everything's properly situated, even the vegetation. They want to make sure that, you know, there are areas where there are parks where people can have that sort of mood. There's agricultural areas, there's meeting halls where people can come together, all these things. So they have this mode of passion. So they have the tendency to want to expand and to make sure everyone's being provided for protection, right? Then there are Vaishyas. So they have some passion also, just like the Kshatriyas do. In today's purport, it was mentioned that as the Kshatriyas protect all of the citizens, the Vaishyas protect the cows. So there's still that protection aspect, but it's on a much smaller scale. They're not protecting all of society. They're just protecting some very specific animals that are very important. But they also have this bit of mode of ignorance where they feel, in other words, their faith isn't high enough where they see that Krishna is providing everything. And so they have this tendency to depend on their own actions for a return, right? So Vaishyas are known for taking something small, making some sort of risk because they have that passion, and possibly getting more out of more return for what effort they're putting in, right? And then you have the Shudras, mostly mode of ignorance. Shudras will not do something unless they're getting something in return. This is how they work, right? So there's not much faith involved that Krishna will provide. It's no. You want me to do this activity? I will do this activity, but you have to give me this specific salary or this specific, it could be a trade, it could be whatever it is, but I'm not doing something unless I'm getting something in return, right? And then there's less than Shudras, right? And so there's all sorts of different, we don't need to get into those. That's where we come from, actually. But since we're talking about elevating our consciousness, we don't really want to focus on even the lower ones, right? So let's just focus on these. So depending on what modes of nature we're influenced by, we're going to have different tendencies, right? So if we're influenced mostly by the mode of ignorance, and there's not much faith that everything is coming from the Supreme Lord, we're going to have this idea that if I want to eat, I'm going to have to work for it, right? Because Krishna's, no one's going to give it to me. You got to work for it, right? So this is Shudra mentality. So anyone that works for a salary, that particular mentality is that of a Shudra. If you're actually working for the salary, you think that because of my actions, now I am able to eat, I'm able to provide for my family, I'm able to, do these things, right? So if that's where the mentality is, then that's where we are. And then going on through. So today's verse and purport, we're talking about how when Shudras are in the administrative post, then there's all sorts of problems. Also, Vaishyas are in it. Basically, if you're acting outside of your nature, there's going to be a problem, right? And Krishna says this also in Bhagavad Gita. He says that it's better to engage in one's own occupation, even imperfectly, than to engage in another's perfectly, right? So there's actually two reasons for this, two main reasons. There's probably more. There's two main reasons for this. There's an individual reason and there's a collective reason, right? So individually, each of us, if we can perform an action perfectly, but it's not actually in our nature, then it's not really purifying our senses. It may have a good external result, right? But we don't focus on the externals, right? This is a spiritual movement. This isn't a material movement. So let's say, for example, that I can, let's see, I could build something really well, right? And so I go and I, build that thing. But if it's not my nature, in other words, if those aren't the modes of nature that I'm actually dealing with, the ones that I have to purify, then there was no benefit in me building that thing, even if people are enjoying the material result of that, right? If it wasn't my nature, then it's not helping me in my Krishna consciousness. Therefore, there was no point in doing it, right? So, but if we engage actually in our own natures, then what we're doing is we're taking something that these modes of natures that are currently hiding us from Krishna, we're actually hiding behind them, right? It's not that all of a sudden we're walking down the street innocent one day and then these modes of nature come and surround us and we're victims of them. It's that we've chosen to, we've used our free will to act independently from Krishna as independent controllers and enjoyers. And so we've hidden behind these things, behind the shadow of these modes of nature. So whichever ones we're hiding behind, those are the ones that we have to deal with. We don't have to deal with someone else's. We have to deal with our own. And so when we engage our nature, our conditioned nature in Krishna's service, then that then becomes purified, those particular modes of nature. And then so they gradually start being peeled back layer by layer. And then we can experience the light then, instead of the shadow, then we can actually experience the light as we engage our conditioned nature in Krishna service. Then our constitutional nature begins to shine through. So that's individually why that helps us to engage in our own, according to our own nature, right? But then collectively, it also helps because when we're engaging according to our own nature, so we're helping ourselves, but we're also helping others. If we're engaging in another occupational duty, then no one can be satisfied. And so this was a common thing that was brought up for the last several chapters, where the fact that Krishna is gone from the vision of the world. Of course, Krishna is within everything, so he's never really gone. But Krishna as a person was there on the earth, and now he's disappeared. And so all of these, pardon me, all of these symptoms of Kali are coming up. And so this already back in the chapter where Arjuna went to go meet with Krishna, and he's on his way back. He's late, and Maharaj Yudhishthira is getting nervous, and he sees all of these bad omens, and he knows what happened, but he's hoping that that's actually not what happened. So even from those chapters and then to this chapter, this previous chapter that we just finished yesterday, and the chapter that we're starting, it's all about that concept that if we don't see Krishna in our activities, then it will be a mess. There cannot be any positive outcome if we're working without Krishna in mind, right? And so this is the underlying principle there. And so the way we do that is to engage our nature according to Varnashram, the way that Krishna showed us. You have a conditioned nature. It's unfortunate, but okay, you have to work with what you have. If you do it in this particular way, according to Varnashram, the way that Krishna gave us, then our consciousness will be purified and all of society will also run a lot smoother, right? So today, in today's verse and purport, we saw that sometimes Shudras or Vaishyas are in the post of the administrators, the Kshatriyas, right? So we can see that today, actually. It's quite obvious that the administrators, or those who are creating and enforcing laws, they're not Kshatriyas by nature. They don't care about the protection of the citizens. What they care about is profit, right? So that means Vaishya or Shudra. They still make laws and they still enforce laws, but they only do it if it's profitable, right? And so this is what happens collectively when someone engages in an occupation that's not their own. Everyone suffers. And it's not just if a Vaishya or a Shudra is in a Kshatriya position, it's if anyone is acting outside of their position, there will be chaos, right? Same thing with the Brahmanas, those who are supposedly in charge of educating us, right? And it should be according to the Vedas. It's not according to the Vedas. It's according to basically an ever-changing idea of what the world wants you to believe as far as, history and science and all of these things. And so it's not actually done. It's not done by people in the mode of goodness. They're not detached and they're not getting their information from an authorized source, right? So anytime we're acting out of our own nature, not only are we hurting ourselves by not actually purifying our senses, but we're actually hurting all of society because things aren't going properly. Now, the last few days, we also talked about how, the Devatas, they're not getting the sacrifices, the forefathers, they're unhappy because they're not, and so we talked about the I forget words all the time now. The consequences, right? These are consequences of people not acting properly according to the Vedas. But the actual problem, just like today, instead of me talking mostly about cow protection, I wanted to talk about how it's dangerous for Shudras to engage in others' occupations. There are consequences, such as the Devatas are unsatisfied. The real reason for their dissatisfaction isn't that people aren't offering sacrifices. The real reason for the Pitris, the despondents, isn't because they're not being fed by their descendants. The real reason is because no one's following Krishna's rules, right? The Devatas thrive when people follow Krishna's rules because they appreciate Vishnu. That's why they're above Bhumandala, where the Kala Chakra, the sun, the movements of the sun and the stars are there, because they, in their previous lives, in their collective karma, they've understood the importance of Lord Vishnu. So they at least appreciate, right? Those who are in the subterranean planets, they do not appreciate Vishnu, so they don't have that reminder, that constant reminder, the Kala Chakra, right? So they could care less. But everyone who's pious suffers when anyone is acting not according to Krishna's will, right? According to the way that Krishna wants and that he designed. So our actions shouldn't just benefit ourselves, they should benefit everyone, right? So one might say, well, the way that the current society is, that, it's fine. You have Vaishyas in the posts of Kshatriyas. So they're creating and enforcing laws based on profit, but good for them, because then they're just making more profit, right? And then, if they're kind enough and they're magnanimous, then they can also give some of that profit to others. They call that trickle down economics. And we've bought it hook, line, and sinker. And we somehow think that that's actually a good plan, right? But we see that it's not. It's not, because those who are creating and enforcing laws, it should be based on protection. It shouldn't be based on profit, because when it's based on profit, you have all sorts of global disasters. You have all sorts of, in other words, we're not being protected from anything. We're just being exploited, right? And most people can see this. Most people understand that. And we can see that the reason for this is because we're not following Varnashrama. Now, we don't have to call it Varnashrama. We can just say we're not following Krishna's system, because, like I said, some of us have a bad taste in our mouth of that word for some reason. We've gotten an idea of what it means that's actually not what it means. But what it actually means is the way that Krishna showed us how to deal in society so that we can purify our consciousness and become Krishna conscious, right? So if we see it as that, and we perform our activities in that way, then everything else becomes everything else just works out. In other words, if we focus on this, if we focus on, okay, what is my nature and how do I engage that in Krishna's service by following, how Krishna tells us to do it in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and inquiring from the spiritual master, following the examples of the sadhus. If we do that, then of course we're going to protect cows, right? We're going to make sure that the milk that we're using comes from, protected cows, ideally. If they can't, then at least if we know someone who is protecting cows, then we will also do that. But it has to be, the consciousness has to be proper, that we're doing it to serve Krishna, not that we're doing it for any other reason, right? We can do it for any other socio-political reason, and it's not going to give us the benefit, right? The benefit happens when we have proper consciousness, right? So, as the past few chapters pointed out, without Krishna, the world is in chaos, right? So fortunately for us, Krishna is everywhere. This comes up in our Shastra in many places. Especially, we have two versions of Chatur Shloki. One's Bhagavatam, one's Bhagavad Gita. And in both of them, the first verse is Krishna explaining how he's the source of everything, material and spiritual. There's nothing but Krishna, right? So he is everything. He's within everything. And so we have the opportunity to see him in everything if we redirect our consciousness from self-centric to God-centric, to Krishna-centric. And so when we do this by following the Vedas, by following the instruction of the spiritual master and the examples of the sadhus, then we start seeing how things are actually to be done, right? Because we're getting this guidance, this proper guidance from the descending process. We understand, okay, I've been acting in this way according to my previous conditioning, but now that I've been engaging that conditioning in according to the Vedas, according to the spiritual master and the sadhus, then now that's become purified, and now I can see how I'm actually meant to be working. In other words, my conditioned nature is now becoming purified, and I'm starting to understand my constitutional nature, my eternal nature, right? And then so we start seeing Krishna everywhere, and we start acting accordingly. So if this belongs to Krishna, then I shouldn't act as if it's mine and try to exploit it, try to get everything I can possibly get out of it. No, I have to understand, okay, how is this to be used in Krishna's service, right? So we have the opportunity to serve Krishna in everything and act according to his desires. But when we choose to act according to our own desire, then just chaos ensues for all, not just for us, but for everyone, just like we talked about earlier. So the conclusion for today, is that we should act according to our conditioned nature in a way that will purify said nature and reveal our constitutional nature, right? And the way we do that is to follow the Vedas, the way that Krishna said. He said, these modes of nature, 714, Acharya Prabhu just gave class on that for the Sunday feast, that this divine energy of mind consisting of the three modes of material nature, they're very difficult to overcome, but one who has surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. If we try any other way to break free from the modes of material nature, we will not be successful. We have to do it by surrendering unto Krishna, which means if we think that we've come up with some sort of way to deal with society that is going to purify ourselves and that we can make some spiritual advancement, instead of following Krishna's system that is specifically designed to purify our consciousness, then we don't have an accurate idea of what Krishna consciousness is. That is the definition of material consciousness, thinking that some other system that we've created on our own that's not coming from the descending process is somehow going to be superior to Krishna's own system, right? It just means that we don't have the prerequisite faith yet. It doesn't mean that there's no hope. That's the beauty of it. If we engage in Krishna's service, then we will become purified and we will start seeing, oh, okay, I see how this is not only beneficial to me, but necessary. I have to follow Krishna's system. Otherwise, there's no hope for me to overcome the three modes of material nature. This divine energy of mind consisting of the three modes of nature is very difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. That's our philosophy is so simple. We just have to understand how to properly apply it, right? So let's see, where was I there on that? Okay. So then when we do this, when we act according to seeing Krishna in everything and then acting accordingly, then we reveal our constitutional nature. When we do this, not only do we make individual spiritual advancement, as we've mentioned before, but we create an atmosphere which is conducive to collective spiritual advancement, right? Because if everyone's acting according to their own nature, the way in a way that is purifying their consciousness, then they're also not exploiting the others, right? So you don't have Shudras or Vaishyas in the post of Kshatriyas enforcing laws and based on profit instead of protection, and you don't have all of this other things going on. So not only are you helping yourself, but you're helping everyone else just by engaging your particular nature in Krishna's service. So if we do the right thing, which is to follow the Vedas, to act according to Krishna's will, both society in general and ourselves will benefit. But if we don't follow that, then neither this society nor ourselves will benefit. It just creates chaos, as is mentioned in all of these verses. So we're all in this together, and so we should help one another understand what it is that Krishna wants us to do, help us identify what our natures are and how we engage those in Krishna's service. And when we successfully do this, all of these other things that are being that are problems right now in society, such as cow protection and things like that, all of these things automatically resolve themselves because we're acting according to our own natures now. But if we try to artificially solve these problems without putting proper attention to our Krishna consciousness and putting Krishna in the center, thinking that we are the doers, then we're not going to make any progress, no matter how good our intentions are. It just doesn't work that way. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments, further discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. If anybody has questions, please just raise your hand or unmute yourself and go ahead. But I think there are portions of it that I will have to go back and listen to again. You have been saying we need to identify what our natures are. Can you give some practical tips on how to do it? I mean, I
Yes.
don't want to admit that I have Sudra qualities, but that's where I am. So
It's funny that no one wants to admit that, but if you give people the options, the 4 options of no salary, the possibility of getting nothing or more, or you do this and you get that, most people are going to choose that. So most of us are Shudras or below.
Paid for like
Yeah.
that. So we are Sudras only.
Mostly.
But I mean, so that's one way of figuring out what our qualities.
That's one way. So another way is this. So because we want to get more specific. So I've given a lot of different. I try to give a different example every time. So I have a new example. So does anyone here not know what cosplay is?
Cosplay?
Cosplay.
No, I don't
Okay.
know.
So those who don't know, it's actually pretty popular right now. It's bananas how popular it is. There are people who are big fans of, it could be movies, TV shows, it could be comics, it could be video games, it could be whatever. Just different areas of entertainment where they're really into a particular thing. And so they make these costumes. Cosplay comes from costume. I don't know what it actually stands for, but basically they make these costumes, and it can be as simple as, a little kid, tying a red towel around his neck and, it looks like a Superman cape and, going around like that. It could be as simple as that, or it could be to the other extreme where there are people, they're very, very crafty, very talented, and they will actually make costumes that are better than what you see in the movies, right? So there's these two, and then there's a whole lot in between there. And basically what these people do is they spend a lot of time making these costumes, and some of them, they only get to show that they'll spend hundreds of hours on making a costume, and they'll only get to show it one time, because many of them, the really diehard ones, they want to make a new one for every different conference that they go to, right? So they'll spend hundreds of hours on this thing just to get it to perfection. They'll wear it to one event. People will, gawk over it and all that. And then many of them, that's the only time they'll wear it, because now they're going to make a new one that, they go through that whole thing. So the reason I bring this up is actually because it's pretty popular these days. Maybe not, maybe the devotees don't, it's not on their radar, which is, that's a good thing. But say, for example, someone is into cosplay, doing this, right? And then they hear about Krishna consciousness, because there are these things that's called Comic-Con. There are conventions of people like comic books, and comic book movies are very popular these days. Some of the highest grossing films these days are based on comic books, right? And so Comic-Cons are becoming very popular. And there are devotees who distribute books, and they basically go wherever there's a crowd. So they'll go to parking lots of football games or concerts or things like that. So now, since Comic-Con is such a big thing, the parking lot is packed. So you have devotees that are going to the parking lots of these Comic-Cons, and they're distributing books. So say one of these people who do this cosplay, they get a book and they start reading. They're like, oh yeah, this is really cool. So they start coming to Krishna consciousness. So their conditioned nature is that they like creating these things that dress up, that are very accurate to a particular, thing, right? So for them to engage their nature, what they do is then they become pujaris, dress makers and jewelry makers for the deities. But one may say, okay, well, no, we don't want Krishna being dressed up as Darth Vader or Little Red Riding Hood or Santa Claus, which has happened, unfortunately. No, these cosplayers, they actually understand. They don't whimsically put things together. They do a whole lot of research, and they make sure it's very accurate. So for example, if you're reading through Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll start seeing there's so many descriptions of Krishna, what he wears, how he's ornamented. Who can tell me on here what kind of earrings Krishna wears.
Ones that dangle.
Okay, yeah, they are
Shark-shaped.
dangling.
Okay,
Shark
alligator or shark shaped? Yeah.
Who said? So that was Bob and Mikey, right?
Yeah, I said alligator shaped.
Okay. Good one.
Yeah, I think it's like fish shaped, some sort of fish or something. No?
Right. Who knows the Sanskrit word for what has been translated as shark shaped or sometimes alligator? Does anyone know it?
Damodarashtakam.
Lasat kundalam gokul. Bhajaman.
Actually, let's see.
Amisaram.
I
Lasat
don't know if it's actually in that song, but if in the other descriptions in Bhagavatam, there's a very specific word. It's makara. Does anyone know what a makara is?
Alligator.
What's that?
Alligator.
It's sort of. It's actually something that we don't have direct experience of because it's sort of like a hybrid of different animals that we haven't really seen. I have seen a picture of a descendant of a makara, which is a very, very big crocodile, but it has a curved up nose. So it's basically a cross between a crocodile, an elephant, and a shark. But Srila Prabhupada often would just translate it as shark, makara. Like even of fishes, I am the shark. That's in Bhagavad Gita, but actually makara, makara is there in the Sanskrit. So someone who's a cosplay enthusiast, they go and they read these things and then they find out, okay, what exactly is this makara? Because some devotees just made these sharks because that's how it's translated. But others look further into it because then the Vedas actually explain different passages, what it looks like. So it actually has feet like an alligator and teeth like an alligator, but its nose continues like the trunk of an elephant. And so it has these and it has fin as well. So sort of shark-like and sort of alligator-like and sort of, like that. Who knows what color the Kaustuba gem is that Krishna wears always? He's never without it.
Was it reddish?
Yellow?
Okay, there's two guesses. Anyone else? Red and yellow? You're thinking of a different gem
White?
on the reddish one. White. Srivats is white. But the Kaustuba gem,
Blue also. He wears blue too.
there is also a blue gem, the Indranali gem, Indranila gem. But the Kaustuba gem is actually green. And who knows what the Kaustuba gem represents? Because Srivats, so that's the white mark on his chest, and that represents Lakshmi Devi, of course. But what does the Kaustuba gem that Krishna always wears, what does that represent? Anyone know? It's the jivas. And the shape of that gem, because it's not just, we think gem and it's just like, it's basically that cut gem, shape. Like, how diamonds are cut. So we just figure out it's probably what it is. Maybe it's, elongated, maybe it's square, maybe it's circle. But actually the shape is of two cows, a mother cow and a baby cow. The baby cow is drinking from the mother, and the mother is sniffing the baby cow, or sometimes licking like that. And so it's a very specific shape, and it represents the jivas, right? So when we can read these descriptions, right? And then we can, if we're cosplay enthusiasts, then we replicate those exact things in the proper shapes and the proper colors, understanding what the representation of them is. And so you can see how someone who's very into cosplay would be a very good deity outfit maker, right? Now, like I said in the beginning, one might argue, no, because then they're just going to dress the deities like, barbarians or, this or that. No. They'll pay attention to all the details. They'll go and they'll read through and they'll find out exactly, what's what. And then Krishna will actually be wearing the earrings that, are similar to what he actually wears, right? So it actually benefits them, and it actually benefits everyone else, because now everyone else knows, Oh, that's what a makara is. I thought it was just a regular shark. I didn't know that it was like a shark, but it has, alligator teeth with an elephant trunk and all that. So that's an example. That was a really long example, and I'm sorry about that. But basically, whatever our nature means, whatever we're going to do anyway. We wake up and we're going to do something, right? We have a passion to do something. That's our conditioned nature. It's not hard to find out what it is, because it's whatever we're going to do, right? So some people have a passion for cosplay, dressing up, things like that. Others have passion for rocks, minerals, things like that, collecting these things. Others are entertainers. They have a lot of shakti. They can, they thrive by having an audience and people listening. So they're very animate, right? And so they can tell stories. So instead of telling mundane stories, they tell stories about Krishna. So any nature can be engaged in Krishna service, and it's not that difficult to figure out what our nature is. It's just, we have to observe what it is that we have a passion for, that we're going to do no matter what. And then the way to utilize it properly is to see, okay, currently I'm just using this because it feeds my ego, etc. How do I do this exact thing, but to serve Krishna? And so for a cosplayer, for example, instead of, doing their thing to get more followers and likes and whatever, or just to be, accurate to, the original source material, they could say, okay, well, instead of making these particular costumes for me, I'm going to make, accurate costumes or outfits for Krishna, right? So that's just an example. But any of us, we all have very, very specific conditionings, right? And so some things are more prominent than others in our conditioning. So I think everyone here has heard the story about when I used to be a race car driver and how I engaged that in Krishna service. And then now, it's no longer something that I'm interested in, because those particular modes of nature that were covering me became purified by engaging in the Krishna service. And so now they no longer have any sort of influence over me. They're not holding me back anymore. Right. So there's so many different examples that we can use. And so essentially what we do is we just identify what it is we're passionate about, that we automatically do, things that, without fail, we will do. Like, for example, I've given this example too before, is when I used to work, because I used to actually work for a living, I can count on one hand how many times I was late for work, right? But in all of my time living in a temple, I've missed Mangalarti so many times. For a while, I was actually doing quite well. But then, something happened, and then all of a sudden it was like, it was acceptable to miss, right? But yeah, and the times I was late for work that I can count on one hand, it was because either the electricity went out, or, sometimes when you're setting your alarm, it's AM or PM, and, you get a mix up. But it didn't happen often, right? Because there were consequences. Because I knew if I don't go to work, I'm not going to get paid, or I'll get fired. I'll have to find another job, right? So to me, those consequences were real. But for some reason, those consequences didn't seem that real to me for Mangalarti. But the Mangalarti consequences are actually so much more real. We just haven't seen it yet. So until we actually understand that and get an appreciation for that, then we can't take full advantage of it, right? There is such a good advantage of being up that early in the morning and starting our day, greeting the deities, chanting these prayers to the spiritual master, understanding that Krishna is in control of everything. We are in this terrible situation that we've put ourselves in this material world, and that our spiritual masters have come to take us out of it. Having that whole meditation, marking our bodies as a temple of Vishnu. The whole thing is designed to elevate our consciousness. But unless we actually understand that, then, when the alarm goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning, we're going to be less inclined to get up. We're going to, I'll do it either later, or, not today, or, it's not practical, or, we use all these different excuses about practicality. Maybe that system is actually antiquated anyway. It's not something that's, but no, those early morning hours actually do have a very specific energy in the atmosphere that we can take advantage of. And so if we do take advantage of that, we're going to get a whole lot more benefit. Now you can chant those prayers later, and that's good also, but it's better to do it earlier, right? And so that just means, okay, so then the night before I just go to bed earlier, right? So put the priority on the morning instead of the evening. What am I doing in the evening that's so important that I can't do this morning thing, right? So once we actually start identifying these things, what am I going to, what is that thing in the evening that I think is so important to me, right? And that I put so much priority in. So that's what I'm putting priority in. Okay, now it's okay that you're putting priority into that. Now just figure out how to put that priority toward Krishna instead of toward the way it's serving you, right? So that's how we identify our nature and use it in Krishna service. That was a really long answer. I apologize for that. Now we went over time, but I hope it worked.
Yes, definitely. You said it is very easy to figure out. It is easy, but it is also hard. And it takes a lot of introspection. I think introspection is where it is very hard. It's because you have to be true to yourself, and we are so far out in the wrong field.
We
Just
are
heading back into the right direction itself is taking a lot of, but I did, to even apply this to our services at the temple, sometimes even there, you were saying practicality. I think sometimes we use the time, place, and circumstance as an excuse. It's used so often, and it's like, but there are, and then our nature. Like I said, I had it also wrong, this varnashrama, because I also fell into that trap of, everybody is equal, everybody is same, and there are no differences and all that good stuff. But now I'm starting to understand it the way Krishna had meant it, and it was right. It was just misused, and that's why we are so off. But even in some of our meetings, I will hear that somebody has a Kshatriya nature, and so they are strong and they will be able to fight back in certain roles. It is a very delicate balance, because again, you're saying Vaishyas are passionate. It's about making money. It's about, in a service at a temple, it is shoring up our finances. Should a temple be shoring up their finances? Should we be practical there? Should we use, the real reason why a temple exists?
So these things, the reason why this is important to see. So it is important that the finances are shored up, but that shouldn't be the structure of the management. In other words, the actual manager should be just making sure that everyone is protected, right? And that's what the policy is based on always. And that comes from the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas advise the Kshatriyas. And so this is the priority. And then so the Kshatriyas, they just make sure that everything is going and everyone's protected and provided for, right? Then those who are Vaishyas, they actually shouldn't be in the management position, because they will make policies based on what's profitable or not. They should be in in other words, they do what they do, but it's a separate category where they create the finances and they're given the facilities to do that. But the policies aren't made based on that. The policies are based on what the Brahmanas give to the Kshatriyas, and then the Kshatriyas make sure that everything is going properly. Right, because otherwise then we're following some other system, and we know what the result of that other system is. Oh, so one thing. So it's become popular somehow in America that pujaris have salaries in some places. I don't know if they do that in Philly or not. But sometimes I can see how it happened, because the brahmanas should be taken care of. So every necessity should be fulfilled. So if someone moves into the temple and they're doing full-time pujari work, they should have everything provided for them, right? They should, the temple should give them whatever clothes they need, whatever food they, all that. And that's Brahminical because they're getting donations from, but what happened was sometimes you'll have someone has some Brahminical tendencies, but they're not fully in the mode of goodness. And so they'll want to do these activities, but they'll also want to make sure that they're being taken care of. And then so if the management is run by Vaishyas, then they'll say, okay, well, how much do you need? Right. And then it becomes, so it happens slowly.
Yes.
And it happens in a way that it's understandable how it would go that way, because you're just going from providing everything they need to, okay, what exactly monthly is it that you need? It's a very different thing though. It may look the same, but it's a very, very different thing. Because then what happens is once it's established like that, then people start thinking, well, I can wave my arm around for I mean, if I'm going to get all my meals and my clothes and a set salary, then then it becomes, that. And then so someone who it's not their nature, in other words, they don't have the consciousness that they're actually taking care of Krishna. That's what a Brahmana do. They're doing it because, okay, this is a way that I can maintain myself, right? So that's not the proper way. So it's understandable how these things happen if you look at them like, oh, it went from this to this to this to this to this. But it's unfortunate, and that's what happens when you have people making managerial decisions who aren't looking for because if you're looking for the protection of others, then you wouldn't make that decision to give salary. You would say, look, everything will be taken care of. Here's a list of what is known as necessities. It's not that, you can just say, oh no, I need this and you get it. It's, these are necessities, and it may be a little, it's not as easy to show on the books, these things, because it's easier to just say, okay, it's this much per month is our budget for, for Brahminical maintenance, right? It's easier that, from the Vaishya standpoint to do it that way. But sometimes you need more, sometimes you don't need as much, right? But they just want to see that monthly statement. But it's not always that easy. So sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And so we have to be careful, because if it's just about protection means also not giving too much. So it means not giving too little, but also not giving too much. Because if you're giving too much, then the tendency might be, to do other things. So it's a very delicate balance, but Krishna has shown us exactly what we are to do with it. We figure out what our nature is and we act accordingly in a way that purifies our consciousness
But one thing, Prabhu, in this Kali Yuga, without working, people cannot survive. Is that right?
They absolutely can.
It's very difficult, but
No.
like Chaturvarnam, if everybody does their own thing, then it will be easy. Right?
The thing is, this world has made us think that that's how society works, but it's not actually how society works. This is a very new thing. Krishna provides everything for us. Food comes from the ground, and then someone picks it, and then someone packages it, and then someone ships it, and then puts it on a shelf, and then you have to travel to that store and then pay for the item. Or you could just take it from the ground yourself, right? We can choose to live in community, even if we're not farmers. We can choose to live in a community where whatever we're doing is valuable to the community. Every community needs doctors, every community needs Vaishyas. It's all necessary. We don't need to work. We think we need to work. We absolutely do not need to work. I haven't been working in the last 15 years.
Okay.
I used to think I needed to work, and I did work when I thought I needed to. But as soon as it was revealed to me, as soon as Krishna revealed that to me, that, hey, everything's coming from me. So I don't know why you're wasting your time on this stuff. But I said, okay, Krishna, you got it. I'll do as you wish. And so Krishna provides. So whether it's Krishna providing through your boss, or Krishna providing in another way, Krishna is the source, right? This idea that no, my boss is the source, my qualification is the source, my actions are the source. Those are the lower modes, right? The higher modes is no, Krishna is actually the provider. So there are some sages, they do the Python Vrata, right? I think this came up recently in these classes, where they just sit on the side of the road, and if food comes, they eat. If it doesn't, they don't.
Yeah.
Right? They just have this deep faith. Now, we don't have to take it to that extreme, right? But we do have to understand that our food, our maintenance, our comfort, our shelter doesn't come from our own activities. It doesn't come from our boss. It doesn't come from our family. It doesn't come from society. It comes from Krishna. Isavasyamidam sarvam. The animals are surviving without working. They've been doing it since time immemorial, right? And everything that's there, everything that we need is there. So we just have to redirect our consciousness from this idea of thinking that the current modern model of the way society works means you have to work, and you have to have a proper car, you have to have a proper job, you have to have a proper phone, you have to have this and that and the other thing. That's not actually reality, right?
No, I'm not talking about luxuries, like.
No, I'm not talking luxuries either. People, in other words, you have a job, that means you have to have a car, right?
Purpose.
You have to have a house, it means you have to have a cell phone. It doesn't have to be a luxurious one. It just have to be, because otherwise, how do they get a hold of you to let you know that you have to work? You can't just have your home phone, because what if you're out at, so everyone has to have a cell phone these days. Everyone has to have, so all of these things add up. You add those bills up. Most of your work is actually going toward maintaining these things that you don't actually need. If you didn't have that job, you wouldn't need it. Any of those things.
That's
right.
true.
So it takes a while to get to that understanding, and it's scary. That's what faith is, though. Faith means you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, and you have to do it with intelligence, and you can't do it too soon, because then it's falgul vairagya. If you're still mentally focused on, I'm in control, and so it has to happen organically and naturally. But it has to happen. We have to study Shastra and understand that these things that we're actually thinking that we depend on, we're not actually depending on those things. Those are all external things, and they'll all go away. And so as long as we put more value in those than in our spiritual practice, then we continue to live in this material world. But yeah, it's a tricky situation for sure. One that, I'm still in it. We're all still in it, but it's how much of a hold does that have on us now? If it's getting less and less of a hold, then we're in good shape. If it's more and more of a hold, then we're not in good shape.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyway, I'm not working anyway.
Yeah, we're retired because we're old enough to do that.
Retired, so I just want to spend time with Krishna only.
Yeah, good policy. Good policy. Is there anything else?
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much, Prabhu.
Thank
It's
you.
so nice to hear you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I will try some days.
Try someday.
Yeah.
She has small kids.
Oh, okay.
She still
Yeah.
does a lot of good service. And
Yeah,
I
she
think
does.
as a mother, her job is to train her kids, and
It's a very important service.
yes, and that she does.
She sings nice bhajans, kirtan.
Okay, that's also a good service.
And her daughters, they're very good artists, so they draw pictures for Sunday school whenever I'm asking them. So she's training them very, very nicely. So
That's very important.
like you said, as we need to understand our I don't know, you said it is easy, but it's finding myself in places where I don't want to be, but trying to do it as a service. My nature, and it's just been tough. It's been tough.
Yeah, the more we study Shastra, the more we associate with devotees, the more we follow the orders of the spiritual master, the clearer it becomes. So then it becomes,
That's true.
it actually just becomes obvious after a while. Yeah. If you would have asked me 20 years ago if it were easy, I don't know if I would have said it was easy, but I definitely wouldn't be able to say it with the same confidence that I can say it now.
Mm-hmm.
But it becomes so much easier. So when something becomes easier, even if it's still difficult, just the fact that it became, like if you're pulling on this rope, right, and something's moving at like 1 inch per minute, and you're pulling it as hard as you can. If now all of a sudden it becomes a little bit lighter, and now you can pull it 2 inches per minute, even though it's still hard, it just seems so much easier. So that's basically at where I'm at. It's still difficult, but it's so much easier that it seems, But once we do that, once we successfully find a few of these conditioned, aspects of our life and successfully engage them in Christian service, then we see, oh, okay, this is how it's done. And then so after a while, it might be a little tougher to figure out, how to engage a few of, our attachments or like that in Christian service. But once we sort of do it a few times successfully, then, at least we understand, okay, all right, now I understand how to do it. And I just have to keep it up, sort of.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Nice tips you told.
All right, so we will meet again tomorrow morning at 7:50 for Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Panchakam patarubhyasya kripasindhya patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namo. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.